This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome everyone to the Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program Reviewer Training. My name is Diane Elias and I work at Minnesota Housing along with Nancy Urbanski. And we are here to review how to review the applications. This session will be recorded and we will have some time for questions at the end. I really appreciate your patience with us as we had to move this training. We did have to extend the RFP a couple of more days beyond the original date, which caused a change for our timeline. So really appreciate your patience with that and you're willing to stick with us and be able to help us with this application review. Next slide. So the mission of Minnesota Housing is that housing is the foundation for success. So we collaborate with individuals, communities, and partners to create, preserve, and finance housing that is affordable. As many of you know, the types of programs that we typically are administering in our agency are housing development and also single family assistance. So for example, down payment assistance and that type of service. However, we do have in our department a grants management team that works on some rental assistance type programs, and one of those is the Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program, which is providing prevention assistance or early intervention to households who have been experiencing homelessness. And it is an unusual funding source in our agency. A lot of times you'll see that type of assistance being provided out of the Department of Human Services or including their Office of Economic Opportunity. But in our department, these grants have been around since, well, ours has been around since the 1990s, early 1990s. And so it is a really great opportunity to fulfill our mission in a different way. Next slide. So for our agenda, we just want to do a quick welcome and introductions, and then we'll cover the scoring and application information, as well as look at the review process and the timeline that we have for us, and then we'll have a little bit of time for questions and answers. Nancy, were you thinking about doing introductions of the reviewers as well?
Well, we don't have a lot of people, so I think we're afforded the time to do so.
That sounds good. All right. So it might be easiest if we call on people. I'll try to do my best. So I will start with, let's see, Ji-Young Choi.
Yep, I'm here.
Hi, Ji. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I can. Ji-Young Choi with the Minnesota Housing. What else I should say? Working in, hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I wasn't sure whether anyone is talking. So again, Ji-Young Choi with the Minnesota Housing, in the housing stability team, mainly working a lot with our community partners, like us continual cares and travel partners for some system approach.
Wonderful, thank you. And go ahead, Erin.
Hi everyone, I'm Erin Menny, also on the Housing Stabilization Team at Minnesota Housing, working on the Housing Trust Fund program, as well as Homework Starts with Home and HOPWA. Thanks.
All right, thank you. And we'll go to Sarah B.
Hello everyone, I'm Sarah Broik. I am also on the Housing Stability Team. I'm a Supportive Housing Quality Officer.
Thank you. How about Rochelle? And I'm not sure, Rochelle just connected, so I'm not sure if she's fully connected yet. So I will jump to Jensina.
Hi everyone, my name is Jensina Rosen. I am the Housing Policy Consultant for the Department of Human Services.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, I saw Rochelle's face. Rochelle, how are you? Oh, I think you're muted still. If you're driving, that's okay. You can just wave and then.
No, I'm not driving. My son is.
Oh, wonderful.
I know I get a chauffeur for the day. Yay!
That's
He's back
fantastic.
visiting from the Marines. So he just
Oh my
graduated. Now he's on his 10-day leave of family, and then he's going to be
Oh,
stationed.
congratulations. That's so exciting. Oh my goodness.
I know.
That's
I can't
a
believe.
lot of
Yeah, he's like, Mom, I'm a grown man. I'm like, but you're only 18. You just got out of diapers. Like, okay.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, I hope you enjoy that time with him. Oh my goodness. That's fantastic.
I am,
Well,
and thank you.
yeah, absolutely. And anything else you want to say about yourself?
Oh, yeah, sure. I am with Task Unlimited. We're doing a project called the Envision Project to help house homeless people in the city of Minneapolis and Hennepin County.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And I'm really glad that you joined us for the review process. And thank you for your
Absolutely.
flexibility again.
Thank you for having
All
me.
right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. How about, let's see, how about Henry?
Hi, everyone. Henry Jimenez. I'm the Executive Director of the Latino Economic Development Center. Happy to be here and that I'm still being asked to be part of the team. I'm looking forward to continuing this relationship with all of you.
Thanks so much, Henry. All right. How about Jennifer Prince?
Hi, everybody. I'm not on camera today, but so I guess I'll just get to look at all of you. I'm Jennifer Prinz, and I'm the Continuum of Care Coordinator in the Southeast and South Central part of the state, River Valley's Continuum of Care. Thanks.
Thank you. And how about Corey Boucher?
Hello, Corey Bushy. I'm up in Northwest Minnesota with the Northwest Continuum of Care.
Thanks, Corey. And then Jennifer Lamb.
I am Jennifer Lamb with the Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership, and I work both within Southwest and Southeast COCs.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Abby.
Hello, everybody. I am Abby Guilford. I'm the coordinator for the suburban metro area Continuum of Care.
Okay, great. Did I catch everyone, or is anyone else on? All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm glad we actually had a chance to see a few of you and at least say who we are. I know that normally we have these meetings obviously in person, so it's always nice that you get to meet each other. So I'm really happy that we took the time to do these introductions. We do have a few additional reviewers that you'll likely meet when we do our review meeting where we discuss all of the applications. And so you'll be able to meet some of those folks then as well. All right, so next slide. So you've probably all completed the conflict of interest and non-disclosure. I believe I've received all of them now. And so thank you so much for doing that. Basically, it's just to identify any conflict that you might have in reviewing a proposal that you've received or that was on the list so that we don't assign that one to you. If you find as you're reading through the applications that you end up with some kind of conflict that you didn't realize, so for example, an application has a subgrantee and you're on the board or something of the subgrantee, then you can just let us know. We could only give you the names of the original applicants initially, but you might find that you run into a conflict of reading the application. Just let us know and we can make a change. Next slide. Oh, I should mention one more thing, really important, and I'm sure you know this because you read the disclosure, but all of the information that we do discuss in the application review period is confidential. We actually can't share any information about who has received awards until after everyone is under contract. That's a really long time for us not to be able to share information and have this knowledge about who may or may not be receiving funding, but we will kind of have a sense of who's going to be receiving funding as we are coming to the conclusion of our review meeting, but it does go through a further process with leadership and with our board. And then at that point, when we are making decisions, we then notify the applicants of the award, but we still can't say anything until they're all under contract with us. And that doesn't happen until usually October 1st. So just wanted to make sure that people are aware of that. And next slide. All right, so this is going to be just talking a little bit about the scoring and application so that you have a sense of how the scoring will work and what happens on the staff side versus what happens with your role as reviewers. So first, I just want to talk about the scoring methodology that we use. We do have a regional split with our funding, and 55% of the resources are assigned to the metro area, and 45% are assigned to Greater Minnesota. And then we also do an initial scoring where we have points with the application as well as points for performance. And the application is worth 65 points. The performance score is worth 35. Performance is something that staff are going to be scoring. And so if it's an applicant that has been an FHPAP administrator this past biennium, then we would be reviewing the performance of the past biennium to give them a score up to 35 points. If they're a new applicant that hasn't applied for funding before, then they would be filling out a section in the application related to performance, and that's a part that you would not be scoring. It would be internal staff that would score that. And then we also, once we're pretty confident we know what that score looks like, we then look at the share of need that that applicant represents. So for example, if there is an organization that's serving 7 counties, we look at the share of poverty, unemployment, and cost burden for those 7 counties. And we also try to figure out, in comparison to how much funding they've requested, what does that look like compared to the poverty, unemployment, and cost burden we're seeing in that area. And that's sort of a kind of a proxy for homeless need. We have looked at a lot of different data sources before in order to determine that percentage, and poverty, unemployment, and cost burden seem to be the best representation for the homeless need, because the point-in-time count sometimes doesn't have all of the information or doesn't have the validity that we need to be able to use it. But for tribal nations, we do factor in Wilder homeless survey data, and that's because the census data is less reliable for tribal nations, and so we do factor in Wilder homeless survey data as part of that. And so using the score, the total score, which I'm sure you've seen now that the points add up to 100, and also the share of need, staff then make a determination on sort of how much of those resources will be provided to that applicant. And there's a link in the slides, which we'll share with you, that does provide more information about the scoring methodology and how it works if you really want that level of detail. So as I mentioned, each application will receive a score from 0 to 65, and performance, of course, is done by us. So what you'll want to see is that all of the applications, once their final score is in place, is that the average score would fall somewhere in the middle. And we typically see that the applications kind of represent a bell curve, and a decent application with its total score would be around 50. And then higher scores would go to the applicants that demonstrate a much higher capacity or level of skill or performance in being able to reach populations that we're trying to serve. And so just thinking about your own scoring, try to remember that we are sort of grading on that type of curve where you're looking for C as a decent score, and then reserving the A's for the top scoring applications.
Diane, I have a question for you that perhaps could add some clarity. So the reviewers will be scoring the application based on 65 points. So within the range of 0 to 65, what would the score range be for a decent or C level application?
Right, that would be probably closer to 32.5. And so you should see some applications that score in that range, and then you'll have a few that maybe fall below or a few that fall above. Because you're not scoring very many applications, it does get really tricky because it makes it harder to, sort of see the range of scores that might be available. But that's the really good part about the review meeting, is that you'll have that opportunity to hear about the other applications and kind of understand where their scores might be falling. And you'll still have an opportunity to make an adjustment in your score as a result of that conversation. All right, so here are my hints for you. Definitely find a place to spread out. It's nice if you have a few applications to be able to find a space where you can look at them and then leave and come back again and not have to worry about, sort of gathering them up and then getting them all spread out again. So I joke about taking over your dining room table for your review. And the other thing that's nice about that is you might have different methods that you can use to score the applications. And so it gives you kind of a space to be able to utilize that. And so there are a number of different ways you can go about scoring. And I just want to bring it up because one size doesn't always fit everyone, and there are options that people prefer. But I'll just give you some examples of how people have reviewed applications in the past. Some people read them all first and then they score because it gives them a sense of what the other applications look like and allows them to see maybe an application that really excels in a certain area and then be able to look for similarities or differences with other applications. Some like to have the applications laid out side by side and read them section by section and then compare, and then some read them one at a time. The one thing I will caution is that even though it's a way to kind of ascertain what the score should be if you're using a comparison method, there may be applications that just aren't really all that comparable. And I'll talk about that a little bit later when we move further into the scoring. And so when you're looking at your review score sheet that you have, you'll see that the question is listed in the left-hand column, and it'll show you the potential points that are available for that score, for that question. And then the scoring guide gives you examples of what it would look like if the score was high. So it gives you an example of how you could get the full or maximum points. And that's really important because the scoring guide is really looking at maximizing those points. It's not giving examples of necessarily scoring low, if that makes sense. And then the possible points show the answer to the scoring guide statement. So, for example, if an applicant provided 2 recently implemented examples that are creative and innovative and have the potential to greatly increase access for people disparately impacted, etc. Or the applicant has demonstrated successful longstanding cultural practices, so they've already have those embedded in their organization, there's another way that they could score. And if you feel like that the narrative being provided to answer that question is in the definite range, then you would be scoring between 7 and 10. But if it's unclear or you felt like they didn't quite answer the question, then you might be scoring somewhere between 0 and 3. And then you would put your score in that following column, and there's also room for comments. The one thing that I would just remind folks is that it's helpful to have positive and constructive comments. So if you do have some constructive comments like, oh, I just didn't understand this question, I would have, and then definitely followed up with something like, I would have liked to see and explain what you were maybe looking to find in that answer. And then also if you find that an answer was done well, or some positive comments that you can say, also include those, because that's really helpful to the applicant. So the application sections are project design, equity, and the budget. There's also the performance that I mentioned. If it's a new applicant that has not been participating with FHPAP this past biennium, they would fill out that section, but that is scored by staff. So there's really only 3 sections that you'll be looking at for the application scoring. And I'll walk you through some of that now. For project design, it's worth 25 points. And in this area, we just want to see kind of what is it that they want to do or accomplish. And we want to see that they've engaged people that they're going to be serving in the process of their project design, and that they're able to you're able to really understand what types of service and assistance will be provided from a client's point of view. So this is something that when you're reading their narrative, you should easily be able to tell what types of services that this organization is going to be providing, and it would be easy for you to describe that to your neighbor. And then we also want to see that if they used data or information to describe the need in the community, that whatever they're proposing to do really matches what they've described. So if they've described a really high need for serving youth, you would want to see in the strategies that they're actually going to be doing some assistance to youth. If there's a disconnect with that kind of needs identified versus what they're doing, hopefully it's explained by other resources that will be provided to address those needs, or otherwise you might be scoring this section a little bit lower as a result. And then for the next section in equity, you can see that the point structure for equity is really high. It actually exceeds the project design points. And that's because we're really trying to place an emphasis on applicants who can demonstrate that they can serve populations that have been impacted either by racism or by structural issues in the system that have created barriers. We really want to see that our applicants are figuring out how to serve those populations that have the greatest need. And so we're looking for very concrete examples for them to show that they're increasing access to people who face barriers or have experienced racism. We want to see that the applicant can demonstrate that they have that ability to serve those vulnerable households. So an example that I could give is that some applications may say, you know, we've provided our staff with diversity training, but really what we're looking for is more of a concrete example, like we're serving the Somali population in our community, and we've hired a Somali-speaking staff in order to serve them, and we're engaging these strategies in order to do better outreach, for example. So you're really looking for some straightforward, concrete examples of what they're doing in order to serve those populations. And then you'll be looking at their advisory committee to make sure that they're reflecting the households served. And if you're not aware, the Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program requires that each applicant has an advisory committee made up of folks in the community who are advocates, who are homeless providers, who are potentially formerly or currently homeless individuals, participating together to implement and monitor the plan that they've put together, so that they know that they're so that they can continue to get that feedback about how things are going and make changes if needed. And then we're also looking to ensure that the applicant does have a plan to address language issues and other languages that households might speak.
Thank you, Diane. One thing I wanted to say before I go into the budget is the last couple years, starting with our last FHPAP RFP, which was 2 years ago, we really have tried to make a concerted effort to increase the number of community reviewers that we have participating in the scoring and review process. And we we're striving for this. We were hoping for like a 50-50 where we have 50% state staff and 50% reviewers. And I'm really excited to say that 45% of the reviewers for the FHPAP are representing the community. And we're just so appreciative to all of you for taking the time to lend your time and expertise. We have 4 COC coordinators who are often have been reviewing for us for years, and we appreciate your continued participation. We have 2 providers that were COVID-19 Housing Assistance Program administrators, and so really have that on-the-ground experience of housing crisis and housing instability, especially during the time of a pandemic. And we have also representatives from mental health, chemical health, and employment. And so just wanted to give a shout out to all of you and thank you so much. I know it's adding to your workload, and this applies to everybody, not just community, but I just want to give you special accolades for helping us be closer to reaching that goal. And with that, I'll get us back on track. I'm going to just give you a little bit of an overview of the budget. So the budget total that an applicant can get is 10 points. And there's a few things that we'll be asking you to review and score on. The first is administration expense. It cannot exceed 10%. And I do apologize on this budget. I should have included a table where it automatically would have calculated for you, so it'd be really easy. And I didn't do that, so I'm sorry. And I am hoping that you'll find the math fairly easy to figure out. So in this case, I have just a sample budget here. You can see the total amount of their request down at the bottom of the screen in row G24. And in this, oh, I'm sorry, go down further, in G38. And in this case, they're requesting 1.325 million about, and so 10% of that would be 132,595. And so in the sample provided, you can see that they clearly are below that. So that's one of the, it doesn't encompass all of the points, but it's one of the things that you'll be taking into consideration when you're scoring the budget. The second is, are the budget expenses reasonable? And there's a couple areas that you'll refer to, primarily in this situation, primarily the budget narrative. So for example, I'm gonna highlight mileage. So at first glance, 17,000 might be a lot for mileage, but you would look at what is their budget narratives to substantiate that. And you also may find that elsewhere in the application. You may find, for example, that this grantee is the only provider in 13, would be the only provider in 13 counties, and they are planning on offering robust housing navigation services, and so they'll be driving households to appointments throughout the region. They may be re-implementing household visits once it's safe to do so. And so when you take those other considerations into account, that amount might make sense to you. And so essentially, you know, any expense that you're looking at on this budget, if you have a question, either it was answered in the overall application or it's answered in the budget narrative. And if it's not, then you'd want to make a note on that in your budget notes and possibly take that into consideration with your score. The other area is support services. So we'll want to see that they're offering staffing that matches the need and the model that they're proposing. So in this example, this is a rapid rehousing column. It's a 0.5 staff for a staff that's 20 hours a week. And a little tip that you can do in addition to their description of what rapid rehousing might look like. So it could be an average of 3 months assistance. It could be an average of 6 months assistance, for example. But another tip is to go down to the bottom of this budget template. And this is where they're proposing the number of households that they will be serving during the biennium. And so in this case, one might question, wow, a 20-hour-a-week staff for 245 households, that doesn't really seem reasonable. It seems like that should be higher. And the last item that I'll point your attention to is in the top right of the screen. And we have 4 columns here, and the two to the far right, you don't really need to pay attention to. That's in part for our internal use. If an applicant's funded and we're having to rework budgets and work plans, we look at that to make sure that it's comparable to what they proposed. However, if you're savvy enough with math and with this program, you certainly can take that into consideration. But I want to call your attention to the direct assistance. We don't require that that FHPAP applicants offer coordinated entry or street outreach, although it is an eligible expense. Generally, coordinated entry is leveraged throughout the region. And then street outreach may, in some areas of the state, there is literal street outreach, which is what we fund. In some areas, there's not. So you likely won't see a lot of street outreach, but it depends on the region of the state in which you're reviewing. But what we ask you call your attention to are the prevention and the rapid rehousing household costs. With prevention in this example, it's the average direct assistance cost, and in this case, direct assistance means rental assistance, damage deposit, utility assistance, expenses of that nature. When you're looking at this $4,500 average cost per household, are you understanding why? Did they explain that in the application or in the narrative? They may be offering, because of the pandemic, they may explain that, well, we're going to average 6 months of assistance per household because of the need. And in that case, yeah, $4,500 you might think is reasonable. If they're saying they're only offering 1 month assistance, you could look at that cost and that would show you that might seem high. With rapid rehousing, we generally will see a higher cost per household in rapid rehousing. We're in a pandemic, so it could very much look different this time around. But we are asking applicants to serve households with higher barriers. And as such, we do expect, generally speaking, that the rapid rehousing cost may be higher than prevention. And so if you'll want to go back again to the application, what is the average length of assistance they're offering to the households? Is that aligning with the high number of barriers that they may be describing? Is that enough assistance? And then based on that, and again, based on, I guess not the number of households, pardon me, but based on that, you can just kind of make an assessment of if you think that's reasonable. If you're not 100% sure, that's okay, and you can make a note in the review sheet that I'm not really sure, and that's a topic that we can discuss during the review meeting. But so just kind of wanted to point those things out. Then the very last item is we do have a question on the application about leveraging of resources. We're not scoring on whether they're leveraging or not, so you will not have to assign any points to that, although we do have a section where you can make notes. Where it could possibly come into effect with your score is, and as an example, it's possible that we may see an applicant request very little prevention, or perhaps maybe even not, I'm not sure, but because of the large influx of funds emergency rental assistance funds that have come to the state, they may not ask for as much. But if you're seeing that cost, seeing that their request is really low, that's where you'll want to look at the leveraging and see, like, are they leveraging emergency rental assistance funding for, federal, or are they leveraging Office of Economic Opportunity prevention funding? So that's where you can take that into account. And if you see that something doesn't make sense, or you don't feel like they're really capturing both prevention and rapid rehousing adequately in their region, then you can make a comment on that and possibly have that impact your score. And then the very last comment I'll say is it's really in context of how much are they asking for in their region. We have some regions of the state that often get millions of dollars. We have some that get as little as around 300,000, and that's based on the need in their region. So if you see an application that's requesting 300,000 and they're only requesting to serve 25 rapid rehousing households, that might make sense because their request is so low.
Great, thanks, Nancy. And there was a couple of questions in the chat, so I'll just manage those right now before we move on. One was about the comments that can be given in the scoring. and that applicants could potentially receive those. And that is, yes, how that happens is that at the end of the application period, both those applicants who are awarded funds as well as those who might be denied for the application, they all have the opportunity to have a debriefing session with us, and we take a summary of all the scoring and comments and provide that to them at the debriefing meeting. And so all of the comments would be combined together. That said, your score sheets are public information, so anything that you put into your score sheet can be requested by an applicant. So that's one of the reasons why I mentioned just trying to include both positive and constructive comments, because they could be shared with the applicant. And then another question was about rapid rehousing budgets and whether we were expecting them to be higher based on the goals of our program and on past spending. And do we expect those rapid rehousing budgets to be higher than prevention? And that's a great question, actually. We typically do see that this program has a slightly higher rapid rehousing budget in more recent years. However, prior to that, it was about 50-50. And it really depends on what other resources are available in the community and what's happening in the community at the time. So for example, in this particular biennium, with all of the federal prevention funding available, we might see lower prevention assistance budgets for the direct assistance, because folks might be thinking that for the first year of the program, they might have some federal resources available for that. And then also if they're prioritizing households who are homeless, such as those that are waiting on coordinated entry lists, for example, you might also see an uptick where the rapid rehousing budget increases. The other possibility is that communities may decide that the service funding for FHPAP could be helpful when they are supporting households with other types of direct assistance like the federal funding. And so you might actually see an application that is using the funds in prevention for services, but the direct assistance is going to be coming from the federal resources. So things could be really creative this year, especially because we're in this pandemic period. So I actually don't know exactly what to expect. But I know that in the most recent couple of bienniums, we have seen more rapid rehousing funding than prevention funding. And I think that is largely driven by communities working with their continuum of cares, wanting to reduce the number of households that they're seeing on their coordinated entry lists. All right, next slide. So just a reminder that we will be providing the performance scores. So there are those questions. If it's a new applicant, they'll be filled out. And if it's a current FHPAP grant administrator, then they would not fill out that section. So don't be alarmed if it's not filled in, because they may be a current grant administrator. And that will be worth 35 points. But this just gives you an idea of what types of items we're looking for.
And if I can add one thing, Diane, it may be just to let you know for informational purposes. Normally, we have a pretty tight benchmark for what we're looking for when we award points for grant fund utilization and outcomes. And for outcomes, it's the number of households they've served compared to proposed. However, this year we know that many agencies were impacted severely in their staffing model and or ability to serve households in the way they prescribed in their application. And so our current grantees do have the opportunity to provide us with justification as to why they may not be meeting those benchmarks. One example is if staff were furloughed during the pandemic, for example.
Great, thank you. All right, so the other thing I just want to remind folks of, and I kind of hinted about this at the very beginning, but we have applications that come from all different applicants across the state. And anyone who has done service statewide or provided programs statewide really can understand that our state is not the same in all of its different cities and counties and tribal nations and places. Every geographic area has a sort of a different makeup, a different types of needs, different populations. And so it really is a challenge when reviewing applications that are coming from all over the state to score them in a way that honors where they came from, if that makes sense. So in thinking about your scoring, you might have applicants that are able to hire a grant writer or two for their agency and really churn out a pretty well-written application that is answering the questions very appropriately or kind of meets the mark for like a really well-graded paper, for example. But they might also lack in other areas, and you might have an application that comes in that's maybe from a community that doesn't have those types of resources at their disposal, that the same person who's carrying out the program is writing the grant itself and has to be sort of a jack of all trades in all of the things that they are accomplishing for their agency. So we really want to make sure that when we're reviewing the applications, that we're just sensitive to the fact that applicants vary in their capacity and the types of administrative support that they have to be able to put in and write an application. And we want to be sensitive to that. We really want to be having an opportunity to look at the strengths of the application on all facets, including the ability to serve those populations that we mentioned before that could have been impacted by racism or by some structural barriers that have been put in place by either government or rules, policies, things that don't make sense to be able to serve some of those populations. All right, so I'll have Nancy take over from here. I also want to mention, I forget that we didn't put in a slide for how much funding is available, and we probably should have. So just letting you know that at this point, there's a little over $20 million available in funding for the Family Homeless Prevention Assistance Program for the 2-year period. And so that's about $10 million per year. There is a request in the legislature that is for an additional, I think, $4 million, and we have to wait until that gets settled, and we know that the session is going to continue because the one that we're in right now is ending, but we won't have an answer for that probably by the time we're getting to the decision points, and so we may have to make that determination about the level of funding based on the results of what happens at the end of the session, of the legislative session. So I just want to kind of throw out there that it's somewhere between 20 million and whatever is awarded by the legislature. Hopefully it doesn't decrease, of course, but we're anticipating that it will at least be 20 million. And so we do have 20 applicants that submitted that are proposing statewide coverage at this time.
Thank you, Diane. We conducted our threshold review yesterday, and I believe we had 23 applicants, and 3 of them did not meet the threshold criteria. In this case, they just weren't eligible applicants, and the remaining 20 have moved on, and all those applications have been distributed to you with your assignments. If you haven't received them, let me know. And these are just the items that that are required for them to be submitted while we do the threshold review. And this is a little redundant. Again, this is our performance capacity criteria, so I'm just going to skip over this so we can have ample time for questions. We did not have any new applicants this year that met threshold, so there will not be any points that Diane or I will be assigning to new applications. And again, here is our breakdown. I just want to, Diane did such a great job talking about equity in her presentation. And just want to let you know that we actually doubled the equity points in FHPAP for this round. Traditionally, we have them be 15% of the total application. And that's because of the work that we need to do and to address the systemic racism in our society is so incredibly important. And we need to do better. And so we just really want to honor the important work that culturally specific providers are bringing, and also making sure that all of the applicants, whether they're a culturally specific provider or not, that they're making sure that the services they're providing to households are being distributed in an equitable fashion, that are especially addressing disparities for households that are most impacted by housing instability and homelessness. Our review meeting is Wednesday, June 2nd. That does allow you 2 weekends, and I really hope you don't have to work over the weekend, and you certainly don't have to review over Memorial Day, but just in case you wanted to make sure we afforded you enough time. You should know by now, if you have seen the email from me, which time slot you're assigned to. Metro applications are from 9 until noon, and then Greater Minnesota applications will be reviewed from 12:30 to 4. I do ask that you submit your scores to me no later than noon on Tuesday, June 1st, which is the day before the review meeting. If you've run into an issue or a barrier and you can't, I understand that life happens and things happen. If you can just shoot me an email and let me know. The reason that we ask for this timeline is it really helps with the efficiency of our review meeting, because our goal is to, at that review meeting, we'll have a spreadsheet up where you will be able to see all of the combined scores from all of the reviewers for all of the assigned applications. So it's kind of just helpful to kind of start a talking point. And as Diane said, you're not tied to the score you assigned when you submit that to me. You will have an opportunity to change your score based on the discussion that you'll have for each of the applications that you reviewed. And here is our timeline where even though we had to delay the RFP due date, thankfully, it did not impact anything outside of the review timetable. So after our review meeting occurs, we will be working with our leadership and making funding recommendations. And we have to take that to our internal clearinghouse committee on June 10th. And then we expect to be going to our board on July 2nd. And assuming that they approve our recommendations, we will then submit award letter, or select or not and non-select letters to all of the applicants with the intent of executing these contracts by October 1st of 2021. And that is it for our presentation, and we do have some time for questions. I'm just going to open up the chat because I think I saw something come in.
I think I covered the chat questions already, but you're welcome to use the chat or just simply feel free to unmute.
I think I'm not able to open the chat. It could be because I'm presenting the PowerPoint. I think I saw a question from Corey about that date not working, and is it possible to oh, good. Go ahead, Corey.
Oh, I sent you an email earlier just to make sure on the same page. Even I think you switched me to some different Greater Minnesota applications, but the time still doesn't work to attend the review meeting. So if me and you can set up a separate time or something, if that makes sense. If
Sure.
I need to.
What we can do, Corey, is if you submit your scores to us, and then if you'd like, we can follow up with you or follow up with you after the review meeting and kind of summarize what the conversation was for those applications. But as a COC coordinator in Northwest Minnesota, we're not overly concerned that you can't be there. Of course, we wish you could. However, we appreciate your accommodating us, because part of the reason you can't be there is because the schedule changed last minute.
Sounds good, Nancy. Thanks.
Thanks, Corey.
All right, any other questions?
Well, I will add that Diane and I will be very attentive to our email. And so if you have a question about an application and just want some clarification, like, hey, does paying for somebody's gym membership and the other expenses make, I'm joking, bad joke, but just any question that you have and you're not sure, feel free to reach out to us and we can get back to you and talk that through.
Yeah, I would say definitely we have, we do our own reviews of other state applications, and some of the things that I think are challenging for me are things like, how do we know if a cost is reasonable? And so just being able to reach out and ask us questions, you can do that at any time. And then we have one question about, will each reviewer get their own group of applicants, or will there be overlap? And so there is overlap. There is more than one reviewer per application. And Nancy, how many do we have per application?
That's a great question. Our goal, which we accomplished, is to have 5 reviewers for each application. And after which time we will look at different scoring possibility, different final score methodologies that we will vet with our leadership staff and especially our research staff. And we may take the average of all 5. If we see that there are like huge outlier scores, which is somewhat common, we may choose to take out the high and low and then use the average score. And so in order to make that final score as realistic and fair as possible to those applicants, we shoot for 5. And so I'm very happy that we were able to do so. Great question, Kalina.
All right. Any more questions? Otherwise, we will let you go with 8 minutes to do something fun before your next meeting.
And I do want to give a shout out, I'm sorry, to our internal state staff and also to our staff, our state friends from DHS. Sorry that I left you off the list, but we appreciate that you are consistently reliable and helping us review these applications. So thank you so much.
And thanks to